My name is Ashley. I am currently a registered nurse completing my bachelor's degree through Upper Iowa University. My nursing degree, or my nursing education, actually started in my second year of college. My first year of college, I started out as a business administration major, and it was my first semester. I was at University of Northern Iowa, and I was sitting in my dorm room one day looking through my textbooks. And when I'm looking through my textbooks, I was thinking to myself, all I'm ever going to do is sit at a desk and be on a computer. And that's not something I want to do with the rest of my life. So at that point, I had decided I knew I didn't want to go to school for accounting anymore. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. So one of my friends had mentioned she was going to try to get her CNA just to make some extra money while we were in college. I was like, well, that's not a bad idea. Maybe I should check into that. So my stepmom is a nurse. She works in the NICU, and I had asked her one day, I said, do you care if I were to go to work with you one day and just see what you do and what being a nurse is all about? And she's like, no, of course not. So I went to work with her one day, and she worked in a NICU, which I knew the NICU wasn't for me, but I liked the idea of what she did. She took care of people who needed her, who couldn't, they couldn't get through their day without her help. So I went on and I got my CNA in the spring of 2011 up in Waterloo, Iowa. I completed that and I moved home, which is Indianola, Iowa, and I started working as a CNA in the hospital. The hospital that I worked in was like an 18-bed hospital that had a couple of swing beds for what they said were ICU patients, and then we also had a couple of beds for labor and delivery. I quickly learned that that wasn't for me because we would have days where we would have 3 patients, no patients, or 17 patients. You never knew what you were walking into. So then I decided that I wanted to work in a nursing home. And in a nursing home, it's much busier. While I was working in the nursing home, I decided that I wanted to go back to school and get my LPN. So I had applied in the summer of 2011 to start school in the fall at Indian Hills in Centerville. So I started at Indian Hills in Centerville. I had to take some prerequisites, so I finally finished with my LPN in the spring of 2013. When I was done with my LPN, I took about 2 years off, and I went to Kansas City, Missouri, where I worked in a nursing home as a nurse, and I lasted 3 months there. I quickly learned that they were very short-staffed. Management didn't want to listen to any of the issues that we had, and I knew that it was time for me to move on. It was a short 3 months, but I knew that I had to move on. So then I became a school nurse, which is something completely different than anything you ever learn about in nursing school. I worked in a classroom as a paraprofessional with a couple of medically fragile kids. I had a couple of kids that had Down syndrome with a few other medical needs. I had one with CP, and then I had one with Rubinstein-Taby syndrome. So working with them was definitely a challenge, but it made me appreciate the life and the career choice that I've made. After a year of that, I decided to move back to Iowa, and I went back to school for my RN, and I graduated with my RN from Indian Hills in November of 2015. So once I completed that, I worked in the ICU at Mercy in Des Moines, and it was the cardiac surgical ICU. So most of the patients that we took care of were post-operative open heart patients that had had a CABG. We might have a few like big bowel surgeries or patients that they couldn't get off of the vent right after surgery might come to our unit as well. So our unit was very short-staffed. I was a new grad, and I was very uncomfortable going to work. I felt like I didn't have very many resources. A lot of the people on my shift were in the same shoes as me. New grads, just not sure, didn't really feel supported. So I had applied to work in the PACU at Methodist downtown here. I have worked there, and I loved my job. But part of the issue working in PACU was we were holding patients overnight all the time. I mean, there was, at least once a month, we were open, working 20 hours, having to hold patients in the PACU because there were no floor beds. So then I moved on to Cath Lab, and that is where I am right now. is working in cath lab. I would have to say that one of the biggest things that I've learned is being an advocate for my patients. Especially when I worked in PACU, a lot of my patients were under, the influence of anesthesia still, so they were not always able to make sound decisions for themselves. So I knew that it was my job to make those decisions for my patients. So I have felt that that's been very important in my journey of being a nurse. Right now, it's just me. I got divorced about a year ago. I don't have any pets or anything. I live in an apartment with my sister. My sister and I actually do enjoy walking around the pond that's right by where we live. We enjoy going shopping together. I like to travel. I have a couple of trips coming up. I'll be going to Kansas City in July, the Lake of the Ozarks in August, and then in October I will be going to Indianapolis, and then in November I will be going to Nashville. I currently live in Des Moines, Iowa, and I work in the cath lab at Methodist downtown. I hope to continue my education after I am done with my BSN and getting my master's in nursing informatics. More specifically, I'd really like to work for a company like Cerner or Epic and help with their charting systems. I think that a lot of these charting systems, they're great, but when you work somewhere specific, like a cardiac surgical ICU, where you care for CABG patients, they have things in their charting systems that we don't use, and they're also missing things that we need to be charting on. And then same with cath lab, there's things that we need to chart on, and then there's things that we don't need to chart on. So I think that just making those more specific to those different areas is very important to being able to keep really good records for our patients in case something happens in the future and they were to need their records. One of my other really big influences was my mom. She would be 46. She just finished nursing school, so she's like a year or two behind me as far as being an RN. And she works as a floor nurse, so she's really pushed me to remember that me being more of a specialized nurse, having worked cath lab and PACU, that our floor nurses work very hard and they work very long hours just like us specialty nurses. So her being a positive influence has really helped me with my nursing journey as well in the last year or so.